Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking specifically about Star Trek Oak Forge, the Dungeons & Dragons, Star Trek Next Generation, Genesys tabletop role-playing game. Let me repeat all that. Oak Forge is the Dungeons & Dragons tabletop role-playing game I plan to play within the existing tabletop role-playing game campaign world that I have for Star Trek Next Generation using the Genesys system, right? Now that's like that's a shell game there, right? Like that's a lot of games within a game. That's a game within a game, right? So let me talk about it, right? So in my friend group, we just have in my tabletop role playing game friend group, our brains have been 100% taken up by Genesys, right? And the reason why is we all played years of Edge of Empire, Age of Rebellion, Force and Destiny, the Star Wars Fantasy Flight tabletop role-playing game with these awesome narrative dice. Genesys has come along and said, hey, you guys have $200 or $300 dollars worth of collectively of these awesome narrative dice. Well, what if you could tell any story you wanted with those dice, right? And we're all in. Like, everybody is just like, oh my gosh, I have a game idea, right? And so I was the first out of gate. I'm a little proud of that, of my friend group to run a Fantasy Flight Games Genesys Universal Role-Playing System game, and I held it in the Star Trek Next Generation world, right? Now, why didn't I use Star Trek Modiphius's game? Well, the reality is I really like Star Trek Next Generation, and I didn't own the Star Trek Modiphius game at the time, right? And so at this point, I'm just more familiar with the Genesys tabletop role-playing game, and I have all the parts, right? You know, whereas it'd be much longer spin-up with the new Modiphius ones, and even beyond that, I'm not sure if I could even run TNG right out of the gate with Star Trek's Modiphius, right? Modiphius game. So here's the thing. I ran this game, and one of the things I did in the game was I said, listen, here is what you want to do as far as... Oh, so I started the Star Trek TNG game, and hold on one second here. So I started the Star Trek Next Generation game, and in that game there was just a short, brief, interesting aspect of the game where I said that they're on the USS Bryce in the Star Trek. The player characters are all playing high-end officers on the USS Bryce. And the USS Bryce productivity algorithms came forward and says, we have a problem with the ship, and the problem is this holodeck game that's being played by about 20% of the ship's major critical officers are playing this game, right? And that this game has, and the game is called Oak Forge, and Oak Forge is a holodeck game that is a high fantasy world that is simulated within the holodeck game, and officers go and the whole thing is run by this officer named Masomi Kodai, and Masomi Kodai has this game called Oak Forge that he's running, and like just 20% of the officers on the ship, just absolutely critical officers, have fallen in love with this game. And because they're all working together, the people who are in this game are able to work together and are able to share skill sets more easily, right? Which actually helps the ship right now. But if anything happens to Masomi Kodai and the game stops, we're going to have an abrupt decline in the productivity of the ship. So the game has actually become a risk to the ship. And so basically the player characters had to vote on whether this game should be shut down in a controlled space and saying, hey, you guys are, have 2 or 3 last sessions and then this is done, so that we can control the rollback and there isn't a sharp decline of the productivity of the ship, right? So in my first session, in my Star Trek TNG game, I had the players vote on whether this holodeck game should be allowed to continue. Well, they all voted to allow the game to continue, right? And 2 of my 4 player characters also said, I actually play in this game. My officer has a character in Oakforge, right? So now I said nothing in this first game, but now I'm getting ready to say, hey, everybody, here's your invitation to all my actual real-life players. I'm going to say, here's your invitation to Oakforge. Oakforge is going to be our Genesys Faerun game, right? And we're going to play a Faerun game with Genesys, and you can make any available race in Dungeons & Dragons Faerun. Any available class in Dungeons & Dragons Faerun is going to be fair game for you to make your character. But when we play this game is called Oakforge, and Oakforge is the game that Masami Kodai has created on the holodeck. So you as players are invited to play in the game that your player characters play on the holodeck. And I'm really excited about this. So this is actually the second time I've done this. I did this well over 15 years ago in a Shadowrun game where basically there was a deep matrix dive, and I took all the player characters in as, you know, they were playing their player characters in Shadowrun, and then we literally switched the game to a game of Saga with the cards, and it was Dragonlance Saga edition. Dragonlance game played with the Saga rule system. If you're not familiar with that, look it up. It's one of my favorite games. It's an absolutely beautiful game. I absolutely love it. It's played with cards but not dice. And that was one of the most successful games I've ever run. Everybody really liked it. Everybody really thought it was a cool niche. And actually, you know, so when they completed that game of Dragonlance using the Saga edition, they had actually, what happened in that game actually determined if they were successful or non-successful within the Shadowrun they were on based on what was happening within this virtual world, right? So this is just a way that, so the reason why I'm bringing this out today is I'm going to be nesting a game within a tabletop role-playing game within one of my own tabletop role-playing games, right? And it's really, I just really think it's kind of cool because you can give players double experience points. You can give them experience points for you know, so in this one, I'm going to be giving them points for the Genesys Oakforge game, and they'll also get extra experience points for the Genesys Star Trek TNG game. That's just really unique, really special. And it's just kind of a surprise. I'm really excited to spring it on my players, you know. And so, and one of the things is I'm incredibly blessed to have players who are like really flexible and kind of, you know, willing to jump in and try something different. And, you know, I really don't take that for granted. I'm really super fortunate to be able to be in that kind of a play space. And I'm just really excited and really looking forward to running Oakforge, my Dungeons and Dragons tabletop role-playing game using the Genesys RPG system inside Genesys Star Trek TNG tabletop role-playing game. Take care.